The Nevada desert doesn't care about your reasons. It doesn't care that you were a warrior once, that you could split a training post clean through with a single swing, that your chieftain used to call your name in front of the whole clan like it meant something worth saying out loud. The desert doesn't care about any of that. It just takes. Slowly, methodically, without malice and without mercy. The way the most dangerous things always do. Grin had stopped arguing with it around day 3. Day 5, she was arguing with a rock. Not a remarkable rock, not even a particularly large one. Just a flat slab of sandstone sitting at the base of a dry gulch, baking in the Nevada sun like everything else in this godforsaken stretch of nothing. She'd been staring at it for what felt like 20 minutes, which probably meant it had been closer to 5, because dehydration does interesting things to your sense of time, stretches some moments out until they feel like lifetimes, collapses others until whole hours disappear like water into sand. The rock, for its part, was not contributing much to the conversation. That was the problem with rocks, Grin decided. No opinions, no judgments. You could tell a rock that you'd made a series of choices that resulted in your expulsion from the only family you'd ever known. And the rock would just sit there, soaking up heat, utterly unmoved by the weight of your situation. In a way, that was why she'd started talking to it. Rocks didn't look at you the way people did when they found out you were exiled. That particular look, the one that said, "Oh, what did you do?" followed immediately by the assumption that whatever you did, you probably deserved it. The rock just sat there. It was, honestly, better company than most. Grin's green skin had gone darker in the sun, not the healthy, deep green of a warrior in her prime, the dull, dusty green of something that's been left out too long. Her armor hung loose in ways it hadn't 7 months ago, back when she'd had regular meals and a purpose and a place in the world. Now she had a broken spear she'd abandoned 2 miles back when her arms sent a very clear message about their opinions on the whole carrying things concept. She had the clothes on her back, she had cracked lips and a tongue that felt like old leather and a body that was conducting an internal referendum on whether continuing to function was worth the effort. And she had the stone. She reached into her pocket without thinking about it, didn't even make the decision consciously. Her fingers just found it the way they always did, wrapped around the smooth weight of it, felt the warmth it held from being pressed against her hip all day. Red jasper, deep as old blood, threaded through with veins of gold that caught the light and held it like they had something to say. Her father had pressed it into her palm when she was 7 years old, and she still remembered the exact weight of his hand over hers. This stone, he told her, is older than our clan, older than the feuds we fight, older than the wars we win. When you lose your way, hold it. It'll remind you that blood doesn't wash away, even when everything else does. She'd thought he meant orc blood, bloodstone clan blood, the literal factual blood that ran through her veins and made her what she was. Now sitting in the dirt of a Nevada gulch on the 5th day of what was shaping up to be a reasonably undignified death, she wondered if maybe he'd meant something else, something bigger. The kind of thought that tends to surface when you're too tired to keep the smaller ones propped up in front of it. She wasn't going to figure it out today. Today, she was going to focus on the immediate problem, which was that her body had filed a formal complaint about the last 4 days and was now in the process of escalating to more drastic measures. Her hands weren't shaking yet, but they had opinions about shaking. Her vision had developed a tendency to go soft at the edges when she moved too fast, which wouldn't have been a problem except that moving too fast was becoming increasingly difficult anyway. 5 days without water. 4 days without food. The 5th day is the one where you start losing the thread of things. The one where the line between what's real and what your brain is manufacturing to fill in the gaps starts to blur. Grin was still on the right side of that line, but she could see it from where she was standing. She put her hand on the rock, just to feel something solid. The rock said nothing. "Fine," she told it. "Be that way." She pushed herself upright, and that's when she smelled it. Smoke. Not the kind that comes from a wildfire working its way across dry brush, all bitter and heavy and wrong. Not lightning strike smoke or distant disaster smoke. This was specific, particular. The kind that carries underneath it the smell of fat hitting flame, of protein breaking down over heat, of something that had once been alive being transformed into something a living thing could use. Cooking smoke. Her stomach responded before her brain did, made a sound that she would have been embarrassed about if she'd had any dignity left to be embarrassed with. Dignity had packed its bags somewhere around day 3. She'd watched it go without much regret. Regret requires energy, and energy was a resource she was rationing heavily. She turned toward the smell. The sun was doing that thing it does in the late afternoon in Nevada, where it angles low and turns everything amber and makes the whole landscape look more beautiful than it has any right to be, given that it's actively trying to kill you. The smoke rose maybe 300 yards ahead, thin and steady, from somewhere beyond a low ridge of scrub and scattered boulders. Grin considered her options. Option 1. Approach the fire. Hope whoever was there wasn't the kind of person who shot first when they saw an orc coming out of the desert in the late afternoon. Option 2. Don't approach the fire. Maintain the current trajectory, which had a foreseeable conclusion. She walked toward the fire. Not quickly. Quick wasn't available right now. She moved the way she'd been moving for 3 days, which was one foot in front of the other. The relentless arithmetic of survival. Each step, a decision. Each decision, the same decision. Keep going, keep going, keep going. She stopped when she crested the ridge. Below, in a natural hollow sheltered on 3 sides by sandstone formations that the wind had spent centuries carving into shapes that almost looked intentional, a man sat beside a fire. Human. Somewhere in his mid-40s, she guessed, though the desert had a way of adding years to a face that had spent time in it. He had dark hair going gray at the temples, a beard that was similarly surrendering to time, and the kind of build that comes from years of carrying weight that isn't always physical. His hands were scarred. She could see that even at this distance, because the firelight caught them when he reached forward to turn the spit he'd constructed over the flames. Real meat, something small, a rabbit or close to it, rotating slowly over the fire, dripping fat that made the flames pop and hiss. The sound hit her almost before the smell did. Her body's response was involuntary and humbling. She stopped 50 feet away, far enough that she wasn't inside anyone's reasonable threat radius, close enough that the light from the fire reached her, which meant he definitely knew she was there. Either that, or he was the least observant man in the state of Nevada, and men who built sheltered fires in desert hollows and constructed proper spits for their meat were usually not the least observant men anywhere. He didn't look up, just kept turning the spit with the focus of someone giving a simple task their full attention, or the focus of someone who was thinking very carefully about something else while their hands did familiar work. This was, in Grin's experience, the moment where things went one of 2 ways. The man reached for his weapon, or the man reached for his weapon. There wasn't usually a third option when an orc materialized at the edge of your campfire in the middle of the Nevada desert. She'd been on the other end of that calculation enough times to know how the math usually came out. Her hand moved toward where her spear should have been, found empty air. Right, she'd left that behind. Her arms had been very clear about that decision 2 miles back. The man turned the spit one more time, then he looked up. His eyes did that thing human eyes do, the quick inventory, the threat assessment that happens faster than conscious thought. She'd seen it 1,000 times, seen the calculation run across a face in the span of a single breath. Orc, size, distance, weapon, status, options. But he didn't reach for his sword. He just looked at her, really looked. The way people look when they're seeing something other than what they expected to see. Not the orc they'd braced for, but the specific details of this orc, right now, in this moment. The way she was holding herself, the way her weight was distributed, the quality of stillness that comes from someone who is conserving every available unit of energy because they are dangerously close to having none left. The silence stretched. Grin's pride showed up briefly, several days late, to remind her that orcs don't beg, that warriors don't show weakness, that she had a name and a history and a code, and none of them included standing at a stranger's campfire with her hands empty and her stomach loud. She told her pride to sit down. "Can I eat with you?" The words came out before she'd fully decided to say them. Her voice sounded like something that had been dragged across gravel and left in the sun. She didn't recognize it as her own for a moment. 5 days of disuse and dehydration had done interesting things to what had once been a perfectly serviceable voice. 5 seconds of silence, long enough to wonder if he had heard her, long enough for the fire to pop once, twice, long enough for a nighthawk somewhere in the distance to call out once and then think better of continuing. The man looked at the meat, looked at her, looked at the meat again, with the expression of someone who was not actually consulting the meat, but was buying themselves time to make a decision that deserved a moment of consideration. You're going to rob me after. His voice had the flat, level quality of someone asking about the weather. Not hostile, not warm, just the simple deployment of language in the direction of a hypothesis. No, you're going to steal my horse. Don't think I could catch it. You going to try? No. Another 5 seconds. The fat dripped. The fire answered. Sit. One word. Grin's legs made the decision before she did. They folded under her and she hit the sand hard enough to send up a small cloud of dust. And then she was on her hands and knees, and then she was moving toward the fire, covering the 50 feet in stages that she wasn't entirely in control of. She crawled the first 10, found her feet for the next 30, and gave up the whole standing thing for the final stretch. Up close, he looked tired. The specific kind of tired that doesn't come from a bad night's sleep or a hard week. The kind that lives in your bones and has started forwarding its mail there because it intends to stay. He had a water skin next to him, a bedroll that had seen considerable use, saddlebags that were packed with the organized efficiency of someone who'd been living out of them for a long time. A sword, practical rather than pretty, the kind you actually use instead of just polish. He pulled the rabbit off the spit, set it on a flat piece of sandstone to rest, and produced a knife from somewhere with the unhurried ease of long habit. The blade caught the firelight. She noted that he could put it through something important before she finished processing the movement. She also noted that his body language said clearly that he probably wouldn't. Probably, he cut the meat, divided it into portions with the calm precision of someone who was accustomed to making things last. Then he set the larger piece on a second flat stone and pushed it toward her with the toe of his boot. Eat slow. You throw it up, that's on you. She wanted to say thank you, wanted to explain, wanted to tell him that this wasn't who she was, that there were reasons she was here, and they were complicated and involved honor, of all things, the kind of honor that gets you exiled. She wanted to say that orcs weren't supposed to do this, to sit at strangers' fires and take food like it was their right or their charity or anything other than a transaction she hadn't earned. Instead, she picked up the meat and took a bite. It was the best thing she'd ever tasted. Not because it was well seasoned. The man had applied heat to animal protein until the protein reached a state of being cooked, and that was essentially the extent of the culinary philosophy. But it wasn't sand. It wasn't nothing. It wasn't the taste of your own failure, which had been the primary flavor profile of the last 5 days. They ate in silence, the kind of silence that happens between two people who should, by every logic the world had handed them, be enemies, or at least strangers with nothing to say to each other. But they were too tired for the performance of enmity, and too pragmatic to waste energy on anything that wasn't eating. And the fire was warm, and the desert was cold, where the light didn't reach. And sometimes that's all a moment needs to be. The meat disappeared. The fire crackled. Water. He tossed the water skin across the fire. It landed in the sand next to her with a soft impact. She picked it up, leather worn smooth by time and use, warm from where it had been resting against his side. She could smell it. Water that was real. Go easy, he said. It's got opinions about being rushed. She'd already taken 3 long pulls before her stomach registered that it had strong feelings about this. She stopped, held still, waited for her body to make a decision about the next several minutes. It deliberated, decided against making things worse. She handed the water skin back. Got a name? He was cleaning his knife on his pant leg, not looking at her. Asking the way you ask about something that doesn't particularly matter, but fills the silence in a way that might be useful. Grin, she said. Then after a beat, because it felt necessary even though she didn't fully understand why, thank you, for not. She gestured at the fire, at the empty stone where the meat had been, at the general situation of still being alive and fed and watered. He nodded once, Cordon Vale. He said it the way people say their names when they've been going by it long enough that it doesn't mean much anymore. Just the sound that other people use to get your attention. The night settled in around them. The desert cold came with it. the kind that makes you understand viscerally why humans invented blankets and fires and the very concept of shelter. Grin's stomach felt better than her empty one had 30 minutes ago, which was her body recalibrating to suddenly having something to work with. What are you running from? She looked at him. He was feeding another piece of wood to the fire, watching it catch. Not running, she said. Exiled. He nodded like that distinction made perfect sense, which it did, because they weren't the same thing. Running implied a choice made in the moment, some immediate threat being fled. Exile was something different. Exile was the door closing after you'd already walked through it. Know the feeling, he said. There was a pause. The fire worked on its new fuel. They kick you out, and they take what you built, and they tell everyone the story of why you didn't deserve to keep it, Corden said. And the story's never quite complete. Leaves out the part where you were given a choice between doing the thing and doing the right thing, and you made the call you'd make again, even knowing how it ended. Grin looked at the fire, then looked at him. You refused an order. It wasn't a question. The kind where you're supposed to follow it because you were told to, Corden said. Not because it was right. He picked up his mug, drank whatever was left in it. The military has a lot of those. So does every other organization that's ever tried to make people reliable instead of something human. What did they call it? Dishonorable discharge. The words came out flat. The way you say things you've said enough times that you've stopped tasting them. Means they end your career and take your pension and make sure the next posting won't have you. So you're homeless, Grin said. Prefer independently wandering. That's just homeless with more words. Sounds better, though. Grin felt something shift in her chest. Small, unexpected. The muscle memory of a laugh moving through her like something she'd forgotten she owned. It didn't quite make it all the way out, but it was there. She'd thought that part of her had left with everything else around day 3. Apparently, it had just been waiting. I'm going to sleep, Corden said, moving his bedroll closer to the fire. You try anything, I'll wake up. I wake up, you'll know it happened. Understood. You can stay till morning. After that, he shrugged. Go wherever you're going. Grin lay down on the other side of the fire. The ground was hard and cold and unapologetically indifferent to her comfort. It felt, and she meant this without any irony at all, like something approaching heaven. Her hand found her pocket, found the stone. The fire crackled. The stars wheeled overhead in the extravagant way they do over Nevada, where there's nothing for miles in any direction to compete with them. And somewhere on the other side of the fire, a man who was probably already asleep, or was doing an excellent impression of it, kept his hand within reach of a practical sword and said nothing more. Grin didn't dream about dying. That counted for something. Morning came the way mornings do in the desert, without preamble, without the soft gradation of light that more forgiving places offer. One moment it was dark, and then the sun cleared the ridgeline and the world went immediately bright and hot and serious about being daytime. Grin woke to find Corden already moving. He was breaking down camp with the efficiency of someone who'd done it so many times it had become a kind of language his hands spoke without his brain needing to participate. Bedroll stowed, saddlebags checked and repacked. The gray mare he'd picketed behind the largest boulder was already saddled, patient and long-suffering in the way of animals that have made peace with the humans they've been assigned to. The fire was out. Grin's body took inventory of itself. The report was not encouraging. Every muscle had filed a formal complaint. Her mouth tasted like something had expired in it and hadn't left a forwarding address. But her hands weren't shaking. Her vision held steady when she pushed herself upright. Her stomach had accepted the previous night's food and was now simply waiting for more, rather than staging the kind of dramatic protest that dehydration and starvation tend to produce. She'd been in worse shape. Not recently, but the memory was there. Morning. Corden tossed something toward her. She caught it more through reflex than intention. A cloth bundle, tied with a piece of cord. She opened it. Dried meat, dense and salt-cured, the kind that lasts because it doesn't have the decency to be anything other than exactly what it is. Last of my rations, he said. Take it. You don't have to, I know. He was checking the mare's girth, running through the pre-ride checks of someone for whom this was automatic. Not looking at her, just talking. There's a town, he said, Iron Gate, day and a half by horse. 3 days on foot, maybe a little more depending on your pace. Follow the rock formations that run north of the dry creek bed. They'll give you shade in the afternoon. His eyes moved to her face. You can make it on foot? Yes. He looked at her for a moment, the same kind of looking he'd done the night before when she'd first come over the ridge. Not the quick appraisal, the real one, the one that takes in more than just the surface of a thing. Then he turned back to the horse. Why didn't you draw your sword last night? The question came out of her before she decided to ask it. It had been sitting in her since she'd first crested the ridge, since he'd looked up and made his assessment, and that simply hadn't done the thing she'd been braced for. Corden finished checking the saddlebag buckle, straightened up, turned to look at her with the expression of someone who was about to say something and meant it to land exactly as said. I watched you from the top of that formation, he said, and nodded toward the sandstone ridge to the north, the one she'd clocked as a good elevated position when she'd been making her approach the night before. 4 hours before I let you close enough to smell the fire. Grin said nothing. Person with something aggressive in mind doesn't walk like you were walking, Corden continued. Person with fight left in them covers ground differently, sets their feet differently. He paused. You were covering ground like someone who decided every step was a choice, and they were going to keep making that choice right up until they couldn't anymore. He picked up the reins. That's not how someone walks when they're planning something. That's how they walk when they're just trying to stay alive. Grin looked at him for a long moment. 7 months of exile. The grinding, incremental weight of it. The way it doesn't hit you all at once, but comes in small portions, each day adding its share to what you're already carrying, until the cumulative load is something you stop thinking about because thinking about it doesn't help. This man had watched her for 4 hours before allowing her close enough to smell his fire, had seen in the way she moved her feet across dry ground, enough to make a decision about who she was. She didn't know what to do with that. I can pay, she said finally. The stone was in her hand without her deciding to take it out. She held it up. Jasper, deep red, gold veins catching the morning light, the way they always did. I can pay with this. Corden glanced at the stone. It was a quick look, the kind that appears brief but isn't. His eyes moved over the stone with the attention of someone who was reading rather than seeing, who was processing rather than simply looking. Something shifted in his expression, small, controlled, not quite recognition, and not quite the thing that comes before recognition. Something in between, something that had landed in him and hadn't finished settling. He looked away. Keep it, he said. Keep it. He was already moving toward the mare. His voice had something in it that she almost missed, a quality she couldn't name yet. You'll need something to remember where you came from when you find where you're going. He swung up into the saddle with the easy motion of someone who'd been riding since before he had opinions about much else. The mare shifted, settled, accepted his weight with the equanimity of long partnership. Iron Gate, he said again. Follow the rock formations, north of the dry creek. You'll hit the main road, head west, you'll see the town. He started to ride, then stopped, reached into the near saddlebag, pulled out a water skin, smaller than the one from last night, older, patched in 3 places with the careful attention of someone who fixes things rather than replacing them. He held it out and let it drop when she moved to take it. 3 days on foot, that's 2 days of water, if you're careful about it. He looked at her one last time. Be careful about it. Then he was gone. She watched the dust settle where his horse had been. In her right hand, the water skin. In her pocket, the stone. She took it out and held it up against the morning sky, watched the gold veins catch the early light, turned it over. On the underside, she'd never paid much attention to the marks there. Her father had shown her once, years ago. She'd been young, she hadn't asked what they meant. She thought about the way Corden had looked at it, that quick look that was thorough, the thing in his expression that had come and gone before she could read it clearly. She put the stone back in her pocket, tied the food bundle to her belt, checked the water skin's patch seams by feel, the way you check things that matter. West, he'd said, follow the rock formations north of the dry creek bed. She put one foot in front of the other and kept going. Iron Gate earned its name honestly. The gates were iron, which in this part of Nevada was less a statement of wealth than a statement of intent. Wood rots. Wood warps in the heat and swells in the rare rain and eventually becomes something that looks like a gate but has opinions about actually functioning as one. Whoever had built Iron Gate had decided at some point in the town's early history that they were done compromising with the climate. Iron it was. Iron it stayed. Grin saw the gates on the afternoon of the fourth day. She'd gotten lost on the second. Not badly lost. Not the kind of loss that adds days to a journey or ends careers. Just the specific loss that happens when the rock formations you're supposed to be following north of the dry creek bed turn out to have an opinion about which direction is north that differs from yours. And by the time you sort out the disagreement, you've added 6 miles and half a day to a trip that was already operating on thin margins. She'd found the road eventually, followed it west, saw the walls of Iron Gate rise out of the late afternoon shimmer like something that had decided to be real, despite the desert's best arguments to the contrary. She stopped when she could read the faces of the men at the gate, took a breath, then walked forward. The two guards at the gate had the look of men who'd been given him all and had subsequently developed a complicated relationship with it. Not lazy exactly, not incompetent, just deeply committed to the minimum expenditure of effort required to technically be doing the job. The one on the left was human, broad, going to wait in the way men do when hard work becomes a memory. The one on the right was something else, hard to read from distance, with the stillness of a person who was paying more attention than they appeared to. Grin stopped 10 feet out, hands visible, posture non-committal. Business, the left one said. Not a question, more of a prompt. Looking for work. The left one did the inventory, the quick one first, then the slower one that follows when the quick one turns up something that requires additional processing. What kind of work does an orc do in Iron Gate, the kind that pays? He almost smiled. Almost. Gate fee, he said, 2 coppers. Grin's hand went to her pocket, found the stone, found nothing else. She'd known this was coming, had spent part of the third day's walking, thinking about it, and arriving at no solution that didn't involve hoping something changed at the gate. Hope, as a strategic resource, had a poor track record in her recent experience. But it was what she had. I've got it. The voice came from inside the gate, from the shadow just past the iron frame where the afternoon light hadn't reached yet. Familiar in the way that very few voices, encountered once and briefly, managed to be. Flat affect. Economy of syllables. The voice of someone who'd stripped language down to what it actually needed to do and left the rest on the floor. Corden Vale stepped into the light. He looked exactly the same as he had 4 mornings ago in the Nevada desert. Same worn leather, same practical sword, same expression of a man who had made peace with most things and was currently just managing the ones he hadn't. He flipped 2 copper coins to the guard with the casual indifference of someone performing a transaction that required no thought whatsoever. The guard caught them, examined them with the professionalism of someone who'd been handed counterfeit currency enough times to make thorough examination a reflex. Nodded. She's in. She's your problem now. Everything's my problem, Corden said, already walking. That's why I drink. Grin followed him through the gate. The town on the other side was exactly the kind of place that 3 trade routes create when they collide and nobody applies any organizing principle to the aftermath. Buildings that leaned toward each other at angles that suggested either camaraderie or structural failure, probably both. A main street wide enough for 2 wagons to pass, which had clearly hosted arguments about exactly this question. Merchants selling things with the aggressive conviction of people who'd decided that the distance between a browser and a buyer was purely a matter of enthusiasm. Grin moved through it behind Corden, who navigated it the way he did most things, directly, without unnecessary adjustment. You waited, she said. Needed a drink anyway. You waited a day and a half. He stopped at a building with a sign that read the Iron Mug in letters that had been painted by someone with confidence rather than precision. The letters were all technically present. Their relationship with the horizontal was a matter of ongoing negotiation. I figured you'd show up or you wouldn't, Corden said. Either way, I was having a drink. He pushed open the door. The smell that rolled out was the compressed history of every decision the Iron Mug had ever hosted. Ale, mostly. Cooked food. The olfactory signature of a room where people come to solve problems and create new ones in roughly equal measure. Under all of it, something that might have been wood smoke and might have been years of the same. You didn't have to pay the gate fee. Corden was already moving toward a corner table, the specific corner table of a man who had identified the chair with the best sight lines and the wall at his back and had made arrangements. 2 coppers, he said, not exactly breaking the bank. He flagged down the woman behind the bar. She was somewhere around 50, built with the solidity of someone who'd done physical work for decades and had the frame to show for it. Short hair, gray mostly. Hands that had seen everything from medical work to bar fights and had opinions about both. She came around the bar with the directness of someone who had long since decided that the distance between where she was and where she needed to be should be covered efficiently. "Corden," she said, "your friend finally showed up. She's not my friend, Mara. She's a stray I fed once, and she followed me home." The woman, Mara, looked at Grin with the expression of someone conducting a rapid and comprehensive assessment. Not hostile, not warm, thorough. "Same thing," she said. Then to Grin, "You look like you walked here from somewhere unreasonable." "Nevada," Grin said. "The desert part." Mara grunted. "That explains the color scheme." She set two mugs on the table. Then she looked at Grin for another moment with the evaluative quality of someone who had nearly completed a calculation. "You any good at moving heavy things?" "Used to be. Kitchen needs help. Hauling supplies, lifting barrels, breaking up the kind of disagreements that start as conversations and end as property damage. 2 coppers a day plus room and board." Grin looked at Corden. He was looking at his drink with the focused attention of a man who was absolutely not influencing this situation in any way. "Yes," Grin said. "I'm interested." "Good." Mara was already moving back toward the bar. "Start now, back room. There are 3 barrels that came in this morning, and they're in the wrong place." Grin started toward the back. She stopped, turned. Corden looked up. "Thank you," she said. "For the gate." He picked up his mug. "Don't thank me," he said. "Thank Mara. She's the one giving you a job." She looked at him for a moment, at the deliberate way he was looking at his drink, at the faint quality in his expression that was the expression of a man who had done a thing and was now pretending he hadn't. "You told her I was coming," she said. "Maybe. You described me. Might have mentioned the general situation." She stood there a moment longer. Then she went to move the barrels. Behind her, she heard Mara say something to Corden in a low voice, and heard him say something back, and heard Mara make a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite a verdict, but lived somewhere between them. The iron mug had 3 barrels in the wrong place. Grin moved all 3. It was the best she'd felt in 7 months. 3 weeks passed, the iron mug had its rhythms, and Grin learned them the way you learn any language worth knowing. Through immersion, through the vocabulary of a place that has been exactly what it is for long enough that it stopped being self-conscious about it. Morning deliveries, afternoon prep, evening service, which ran the full spectrum from quiet to chaotic, depending on which trade caravan had arrived that day and what their relationship with moderation looked like. Late nights cleaning up the evidence. The room Mara gave her was small. The bed was real. The meals came without ceremony and tasted like someone had cooked them with the intention of actually feeding people, which after 7 months of exile and 5 days of desert felt like a philosophical revelation. Corden had his corner table. He was there most evenings, sometimes not. He took work when it came through, escort jobs mostly, the kind that needed someone who knew which end of a sword was the working end and could be trusted not to become a problem themselves. He came back when the job was done, sat at his table, drank his ale, occasionally said something that technically qualified as conversation. They didn't talk about the desert, didn't talk about the stone, didn't talk about what either of them had been before they were whatever they were now. Some things don't need to be discussed to be understood. On a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after Grin arrived, she walked into the Iron Gate Administrative Building and asked for Archie Dunmore. He was older than she'd expected, 60 maybe, with the slightly bowed posture of a man who'd spent decades leaning over paperwork and had arrived at a permanent accommodation with gravity. Spectacles, ink-stained fingers. The expression of someone who had processed enough human difficulty across a government desk that very little surprised him anymore, but who had also managed somehow to retain the capacity to be interested. He asked her questions. She answered them. Name, origin, reason for presence in Irongate, employment status. He wrote it all down with the steady, unhurried script of a man who understood that paperwork outlasted the people who filed it and took that responsibility seriously. Then he got to the last question, reason for exile. Grin looked at the desk, at the grain of the wood, at the pen in his hand. She said it the way she'd said it to Corden in the desert without really deciding from. The same facts, the same flat recitation of the sequence of events, the order she'd been given. The prisoners who'd surrendered, the chieftain's command, her refusal, the choice she'd been offered in the aftermath in the one she'd made. Dunmore's pen stopped moving. He looked up. Not the quick look, the full one. "You're the one," he said. Grin said nothing. He set the pen down, folded his hands on the desk with the deliberate quality of a man redirecting his full attention. 7 months ago, he said, a story started moving along the trade routes coming out of the Eastern Territories. No name attached to it, just the facts. An orc warrior who refused to execute prisoners who'd surrendered, who was given the choice between doing it and leaving, and chose to leave. Grin was very still. Stories like that travel, Dunmore said, the kind that have something in them that people need to pass on. By the time it got here, I'd already heard 3 versions, all different in the details, all the same in the center of it. He opened a drawer, produced a folder, set it on the desk between them. 2 months ago, he said, the magistrate at Red Rock Station changed their policy on orc prisoners taken in border disputes. No more summary processing, formal documentation required. He paused. The magistrate cited a documented case of an orc combatant choosing the welfare of human prisoners over clan orders and personal safety, suggesting that the existing policy was based on assumptions that did not reflect the actual range of behavior in the orc population. Grin looked at him. He looked back. A month after that, he said, the garrison at Fort Calloway followed. Similar policy change, similar citation. The room was very quiet. "You didn't know," Dunmore said. "It wasn't a question." She shook her head. He picked up the pen, pressed his stamp to her paperwork with the deliberate force of someone making something official and meaning it. "Provisional residency status," he said. "Pending quarterly review. Keep this document with you. It won't stop everything, but it makes things slower for the people who want to make things fast." He slid the paper across the desk. "One more thing," he said as she reached for it. She waited. "What you refused to do." He looked at her over his spectacles. "That was the right call. It didn't feel right at the time," she said. "Best choices rarely do," he said. "You only know they were right later, when you can still look yourself in the eye without having to look away first." She walked out of the administrative building into the Iron Gate afternoon with a piece of paper in her hand and a question in her chest that was going to need a long time to find its shape. Marshal Tate arrived on a Wednesday. He came with 6 men, which was the kind of number that announces itself before it walks through a door. The Iron Mug's evening crowd didn't stop, but it adjusted. Volume down, attention redistributed. The silence that isn't silence but sounds like it. Tate was mid-40s, the same way Corden was mid-40s. The way men are when they've spent enough time doing hard things that the time has stopped registering on their face in the usual way and started registering in how they carry themselves instead. He wore his authority the way practical men wear their weapons. Present, accessible, not displayed. He scanned the room, found Grin behind the bar, walked over. His men spread out behind him the way trained men do, covering angles, not threatening. Just present in the way that says we're being professional about the possibility that things might not stay easy. "You're the orc," Tate said. Grin set down the mug she'd been filling. "I'm Grin. I work here. You haven't registered. I registered 3 days ago." She pulled the paper from her pocket, laid it on the bar between them. Tate looked at it, looked at her, looked at the paper again with the expression of someone encountering a variable they hadn't accounted for. "Dunmore stamped it," she said. Tate picked up the paper. "Read it, set it back down." His jaw moved slightly, the movement of a man recalculating. "You cause trouble, you leave," he said finally. "Understood. You get into disputes with residents, you leave." Also understood. The men behind him were watching the room. The room was watching them watching. Grin looked at Tate steadily, not challenge, not submission, just the level attention of someone who was going to stand in this spot and answer questions honestly for as long as it took. He picked up the paper, handed it back. "Keep that on you," he said. Then he turned and walked out. His men followed. The door closed. The Iron Mug exhaled. Mara appeared from the kitchen doorway, wiping her hands on her apron. "Well," she said, "that went better than it could have." Grin put the paper back in her pocket. Next to the stone, she went back to filling mugs. 2 hours later, after the evening crowd had thinned and Corden had relocated to his corner table and Mara was doing her end-of-night accounting with the focus of someone who trusted numbers more than most things, the door opened. Tate walked back in, alone. He didn't go to the bar. He walked to where Grin was stacking chairs at the far end of the room and he stopped. And he looked at her with the expression of a man who had decided to say something difficult and had prepared for the conversation, but not the actual saying of it. "I'm going to tell you something," he said, quietly, the volume of a man who is choosing his audience carefully. Grin set down the chair she was holding. "There's pressure from the territorial administration," he said. "Election year. There's a push to clear the unregistered, non-human population from towns along the trade routes before the votes are counted." He looked at her directly. "I've been given discretionary authority over how quickly I comply with that directive." She waited. "I can slow things down," he said. 60 days, maybe 70. After that, the discretion runs out and it becomes a direct order." She looked at him, at the steady way he held her gaze, at the quality of a man who was telling her something difficult because he decided she deserved to know it rather than be surprised by it. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you're registered," he said. "Because Dunmore stamped your paper, which means you did everything right, which means if I come back here and tell you to leave, you'll know it's not about what you did, but about who's giving orders upstream." He met her eyes. "I'd rather you know the difference." He turned to leave. She said his name. He stopped. "I appreciate it," she said. He nodded once. Then he walked out into the Iron Gate night, and the door closed behind him, and the iron mug was quiet again. Grin stood in the half-stacked chairs. 60 days. She went back to stacking. Dura came on a Thursday. Grin felt it before she saw it. The room's atmosphere changed the way it changes when something with significant weight enters it. Not fear exactly. More like the adjustment a room makes when it suddenly contains a variable that reorganizes everything around it. The Iron Mug's evening crowd didn't clear out, but it thinned considerably in a very short period of time as people suddenly recalled pressing business elsewhere. Mara stayed behind the bar. Corden stayed at his corner table. His hand moved to rest near his sword in a way that was casual to anyone who wasn't paying attention. Dura walked in like she owned the concept of walking in. She was 55, built like something that geography had taken millions of years to produce, and carried the weight of chieftain the way the old ones did. Not as performance, as simple fact. She had 4 warriors with her, all of them the kind that come from a tradition rather than a profession. They moved the way she moved. They stopped when she stopped. Behind them, half a step back and to the left, was Breva. Grin had known Breva since they were young, had trained alongside her, competed against her, shared fires with her in campaigns that felt very long ago now. Breva had the build of someone who'd been fighting her entire adult life and had arrived at a sustainable relationship with the activity. Scars that had stories, eyes that missed very little. Dura's gaze found Grin the way such gazes always do, without searching. "So," she said in the language they shared, "this is where you've been." "I'm not hiding," Grin said. "I'm working." Dura looked around the iron mug, at the bar, at the tables, at Mara behind the counter, and Corden in his corner, and the remaining handful of customers who were doing their best to be invisible. "You've fallen," she said. "Depends on where you're standing." One of the warriors, a woman named Breva, stepped forward, stopped when Dura raised a hand. The obedience was immediate, absolute, the product of years of discipline that had become something closer to instinct. "I didn't come to fight," Dura said. "I came to deliver a message. I'm listening. The war is escalating." Dura's voice was flat, factual, the tone of a chieftain who has stopped having feelings about things that cannot be changed and has begun simply managing them. "The northern territories are pushing into Bloodstone land. We need every warrior." Her eyes held grins. "Even the ones who made choices we didn't approve of." Grin said nothing for a moment. 7 months ago," she said, "you told me I could kill those prisoners or leave and never come back. I left. The war was different then. The prisoners were the same. They'd surrendered. They were finished fighting. Executing them wasn't war." Dura's expression didn't move. "The exile is lifted," she said. "Come back. Fight for your people. Prove that you still know what you are." Across the room, Corden stood, slowly, Not aggressive, just upright. His hand rested at his side. His eyes were on the four warriors in a way that communicated a clear and calm understanding of how rooms like this can change. Grin looked at Dura, at the woman who had given her a choice between two things and watched her choose. At the authority in her face and the absolute conviction of someone who had spent 55 years in a world that confirmed again and again that the way she understood things was correct. At the faint quality underneath all of it that wasn't quite desperation but lived in its neighborhood. No, Grin said. Dura's expression didn't change. But something in the room did. Tomorrow morning, Dura said. We leave at first light. You have until then to decide. She turned. Her warriors turned with her. At the door, she stopped. Your father would be ashamed, she said. The words hit the way they were designed to hit. Grin felt them land, felt the architecture of that particular weight, the accuracy of someone who knew exactly where to apply pressure because they'd helped build the structure they were pressing on. My father, she said, her voice was steady, taught me that honor meant doing the right thing even when it cost everything. So maybe he'd understand exactly why I'm standing here. Dura didn't answer. She walked out. The warriors followed. Breva was last through the door. As she passed Grin, close enough that only Grin could hear, she said something. Low, precise, in the language they shared. 3 human prisoners, the ones you didn't let them kill. Grin went very still. They're at the peace table, Breva said. Already at the door, already stepping through. They requested the clause themselves. The one protecting orc non-combatants said they knew what it cost someone to give them the chance to be there. The door closed. The iron mug held its breath. Grin stood in the middle of the room. Mara set a bottle on the bar, something stronger than ale, without being asked, without ceremony, with the efficiency of a woman who had seen enough to know when efficiency was the only appropriate response. Corden came over from his corner, sat down at the nearest table, looked at Grin with the quiet attention of a man who understood that some moments require presence rather than words. Grin sat down across from him. She put her hand in her pocket, found the stone, held it without taking it out. The peace negotiations, she said. The ones Dura is fighting a war to influence. Corden waited. The prisoners I didn't let them kill. 7 months ago. They're at the table. They put in a clause protecting orc civilians. She looked at her hand, at the shape of the stone through the fabric of her pocket. I didn't know that, she said. I didn't know any of that. I just couldn't do what she ordered. That was all it was. It wasn't strategy. It wasn't politics. It was just the only thing I could do and still be who I was. Corden looked at her for a moment. That's usually how it works, he said. The choices that matter most aren't the ones you make with a plan. They're the ones you make because you can't make any other one. She looked at him. You have until morning, he said simply. Tonight is tonight. Mara poured 3 glasses without asking, set one in front of each of them, and took the third for herself. To people who make the wrong choices for the right reasons, she said, and somehow end up on the right side of something bigger than they knew they were part of. They drank. Outside, Iron Gate continued its evening. The trade routes brought their noise and their people and their commerce. The Iron Gates held their position. The night moved in from the desert and made itself at home, cold and clear and indifferent and absolutely full of stars. And inside the iron mug, 3 people sat with their drinks and the weight of tomorrow, which was going to come whether any of them were ready for it or not. The night before a decision that can't be unmade has a quality to it. Not dramatic exactly. Not the kind of night that announces itself with thunder and atmosphere. Just quiet. The specific quiet of a night that knows what's coming and has decided not to comment on it. Iron Gate did its nighttime thing around them. Distant sounds from the other end of the main street. A horse somewhere expressing opinions about its situation. The Iron Gates, which had no opinions but stood in them anyway. Grin sat on the step outside the iron mug, with her back against the door frame and her hands around a mug of something hot that Mara had produced without being asked. The night air had the desert's characteristic disregard for the temperature preferences of the things living in it. Cold, clear, the stars out in the excess that happens when there's nothing for miles to compete with them. She heard the door open behind her, heard Corden come out, heard him lower himself onto the step to her right with the controlled movement of a man whose joints had developed perspectives on cold ground. He had his own mug. They sat in the silence that had become, over the past weeks, the primary language between them, the one that didn't require translation. After a while, she asked the question she'd been carrying since the afternoon of the fourth day. Why did you wait at the gate? He didn't answer right away. Drank his coffee, looked at the street, at the small section of iron gate visible from where they sat, at the nothing in particular that men look at when they're organizing what they actually mean to say. I told myself it was because I was having a drink anyway, he said finally, and that was part of it. She waited. After I left you in the desert, he said. Started riding, got maybe 2 miles out. He stopped, drank again. I've done a lot of things in my life that I made peace with because they were necessary, he said. Things the job required, things the situation required, things that weren't what you'd choose if you had unlimited options, but you didn't have unlimited options. So you made the call and you carried it. He turned the mug in his hands. I've gotten very good at making peace with things. The stars did their work overhead. But I couldn't get past 2 miles, he said. Just sat on that horse in the middle of the Nevada desert, thinking about the way you were walking, about what it takes for a person to keep putting one foot in front of the other when they've got nothing left and every reason to stop. He paused. About what it says about someone. He looked at her. I've been kicked out of everything that ever told me who I was, he said. Military, unit, the life I thought I was building. And the thing nobody tells you when that happens is that you don't stop being who you are. The circumstances change, the person doesn't. He looked back at the street. I wanted to know if you made it, needed to know. So I rode ahead. She was quiet for a moment. Then, the stone. When I offered it as payment, you looked at it differently than people usually do. He didn't answer right away. There's a mark on the underside, he said. Old mark. Some of the Eastern clans use it. Honor code. Means no harm to a combatant who's laid down arms. Grin looked at him. I saw it in the firelight, he said. Didn't need you to explain the rest. She thought about that. About a man who'd read the whole story off a stone in 30 seconds of firelight and then made his decision and said nothing about it. You could have just asked, she said. You would have told me, he said. But you would have had to carry the telling. This way you didn't. She looked at her hands. That was the thing about Cordon Vale. He understood without being told which things cost something to say out loud and which things were better left to the evidence. They sat until the coal got serious about his position. Then they went inside, and the iron mug closed around them with the warmth of a place that has decided to be home to people it wasn't originally designed for. Grin didn't sleep much. When she didn't dream about dying. Morning came at the desert's usual pace, which was to say immediately and without apology. One moment the sky was the deep blue-black of pre-dawn. The next the light was up and the world was operating again, whether anyone was prepared or not. Grin was out the door of the iron mug before Cordon, before Mara, before the kitchen had started its first sounds. The main street of Iron Gate was quiet in the way that early mornings produce in working towns. Not empty, just inhabited by different people. The ones whose business starts before the business day does. She could see them from the middle of the street, Dura and her warriors at the gate, standing the way they'd been trained to stand since they were old enough to be trained. Still, present, the embodiment of a clan that had been doing this for generations and intended to keep doing it. Breva slightly behind and to the left of Dura, in the position she always occupied. Grin walked toward them. Behind her, she heard footsteps. Didn't turn, knew them by their pace and weight. Cordon, keeping the distance that says I'm here without saying I'm in this. Far enough to give her the space the moment required. Close enough to matter if it came to that. Dura looked at her when she was still 20 feet out. You're staying, the chieftain said. Not a question. Dura had never needed questions to arrive at answers. I am. Then it's done. Dura reached into her armor, produced the clan token. Bloodstone clan, carved from iron. The mark of membership in something that had existed longer than anyone standing here. She held it up between them for a moment, long enough for Grin to see it clearly in the morning light. Then she broke it. The sound was not loud. Iron breaking is not the dramatic crack of wood or the theatrical shatter of glass. It's a smaller sound, more final. The sound of something that was made to last being ended anyway. Dura let the pieces fall. They hit the ground at Grin's feet. Grin of no clan, Dura said. Her voice had the quality of something formal being performed, ancient language being deployed for its design purpose. You are formally exiled from Bloodstone. Your name will be removed from the lineage stones. Your deeds will not be carried forward. Your existence will be erased from our history. She looked at Grin. You are dead to us. The words sat in the morning air. Grin had expected them to hit harder. Had spent part of the sleepless night bracing for them. But standing here in the early light of an Iron Gate morning with the Iron Gates behind her and the broken pieces of a clan token at her feet, she found that they were exactly what Dura had said. Words, ritual, the formal acknowledgement of a door that had already been closed by both of them months ago. She was still standing. I understand, she said. Dura's expression shifted slightly. The small movement of a face that is deciding something. Do you, she said, quietly now. The formality set aside. Just a woman speaking to another woman in the early morning. Do you understand what you're giving up? Not just the name, not just the clan, the history of who you are, where you come from, everything that made you possible. I'm still green, Grin said. The tusks are still here. She touched her chest. But maybe being Bloodstone never meant what we thought it meant. Maybe it was never about the token. Dura looked at her for a long time. Then Breva stepped forward. She moved with the deliberateness of someone who has made a decision about something and is now executing it with full knowledge of the consequences. She stopped in front of Grin, met her eyes. Day 3, Breva said, in the desert. Grin went still. You were moving south along the dry gulch. Breva's voice was low, precise, the voice of someone delivering a report. Chieftain sent me ahead of you 2 days after the exile. She gave me a water skin, told me to place it behind the large flat rock on the north side of the gulch, in the shade, where you'd find it when you came through. The morning light held them all in it. You turned south before you reached it, Breva said. Half a mile before. The canyon split and you went the wrong way. I watched you from the ridge. Grin looked at Dura. The chieftain's face was doing the thing it never did, showing something. It was not a large something. It was the specific, controlled minimum of a woman who had spent 55 years building walls around everything that could be used against her. But it was there, in the set of her jaw, in the way she was looking at a point slightly past Grin's left shoulder rather than directly at her. That was weakness, Dura said. Her voice was flat. Don't speak of it. Grin looked at the woman who had exiled her, at the chieftain who had handed down the order to execute surrendered prisoners, and then sent someone to leave water for the warrior she'd exiled for refusing to follow it. At the woman who couldn't say the thing out loud, but had done it anyway, 2 days out into the desert, when the choice had been between what you are in public and what you are when no one is watching, or when she'd thought no one was watching. It's not weakness, Grin said. Dura's eyes came back to hers. It's the reason your clan is worth saving. A long moment. Something moved in Dura's face that she didn't fully contain in time. Grin reached into the pocket of her vest. Not the stone, the other pocket. She produced a folded piece of paper that she'd spent part of the early morning working on, while the iron mug slept around her and the candle on the kitchen table gave her just enough light to work by. She unfolded it, held it out to Breva. Ghost Canyon, Grin said. The approach from the north looks like the obvious route. It isn't. There's a secondary path along the eastern ridge that comes out above the canyon floor. If you're being pushed into that terrain and you know about the eastern ridge and whoever's pushing you doesn't, you control the engagement. Breva took the paper, looked at it, looked at Grin. I'm not coming back, Grin said. I'm not fighting this war. But I don't want my people to die in a canyon because they didn't know about a path on a ridge. Breva folded the paper. Put it away. Dura looked at the map in Breva's hands, then at Grin. Something in her expression reorganized itself into something Grin had never seen on that face before. Not gratitude. Dura was constitutionally incapable of gratitude in any form that could be identified as such, but something adjacent to it. The wordless acknowledgement of a debt that couldn't be repaid in a language either of them spoke. She reached down, picked up the broken pieces of the clan token from the ground, looked at them, put them in her own pocket. Then she mounted her wolf because Dura was entirely the kind of chieftain who rode a wolf and had never once reconsidered this. Her warriors mounted. Breva last, And Breva looked at Grin one final time with the expression of someone who would carry this morning for a very long time. Goodbye, Grin, Breva said. Grin looked at the woman she trained alongside, competed against, shared fires with in campaigns that felt like a different life. Take care of them, she said. Breva nodded once. Then they rode. West into the morning, into whatever came next for Bloodstone Clan, into a war that Grin was no longer part of, but had already, without knowing it, already changed. The dust settled. The Iron Gate morning continued around her. A cart on the main street, a merchant opening a stall, the smell of breakfast from somewhere, coffee and something warm and the ordinary business of a day beginning. Corden walked up beside her. He looked at the place where the riders had been. Neither of them spoke until the iron mug was in sight. You gave them the map, he said finally. They're still my people. She kept walking. That doesn't stop being true because the token's broken. He nodded. She stopped at the door of the iron mug. Looked back once at the gates, at the direction Dura had ridden, at the morning that had just done what it did regardless of whether anyone was ready for it. Then she pushed the door open. Mara was behind the bar, looked up, said nothing, set a mug on the counter. Grin sat down. She put her hand in her pocket, found the stone, held it for a long time, not because she was lost, just because it was there, and it was real. And some mornings, that's the whole of what you need. 5 months later, the back lot behind the iron mug had acquired a purpose it hadn't been designed for. Mara had cleared it 3 months ago, largely because Grin had been using it anyway, and Mara had decided that unauthorized use was less efficient than authorized use with some ground rules attached. The ground rules were simple. Nothing gets broken that costs money to replace. If someone bleeds, they clean it up themselves. And the lesson ends when Mara says it ends, because sometimes the lesson running long conflicted with the barrel delivery schedule, and the barrel delivery schedule was not negotiable. 6 students, 3 human, 3 orc. Ages ranging from 17 to 32. Backgrounds ranging from the son of a merchant who decided he wanted to know how to handle himself to a young orc woman who'd come through Iron Gate 4 months ago with nothing and had stayed because the Iron Mug had a room and Mara had a job available. And the question stopped at, did you cause any trouble and could you work? Grin taught them the way she'd been taught, without sentimentality and without shortcuts, but also without the part where the teaching was primarily about breaking people down to rebuild them in a preferred shape. She taught the old codes alongside the technique, not as abstract philosophy, as practical architecture. You don't learn when to fight, she told them on the 3rd session, before you learn when not to. Anyone can throw a punch. The hard part is knowing which problems a punch actually solves and which ones it just makes louder. Corden watched from the back step of the iron mug most mornings, coffee in hand. He had opinions about technique and occasionally offered them when asked, which Grin started doing more often because he was right more often than she wanted to acknowledge out loud. He was good at explaining things simply, had a way of finding the core of a complicated movement and stripping away everything that wasn't necessary until what was left was the thing itself. Grin was better at the old codes, at the context, at the why, underneath the how. They didn't discuss this distribution of labor. It just organized itself. Marshal Tate came by one afternoon and watched for 20 minutes from the gate of the lot without saying anything. Then he left. 2 weeks after that, the pressure from the territorial administration stopped being something Grin heard about secondhand and became something that simply wasn't happening anymore. The election had resolved. The new administration had different priorities. Tate stopped in one evening at the Iron Mug, sat at the bar, drank his coffee. Regulations are being updated, he said. Regional policy on non-human residency in trade route towns. New framework, more structured. Grin was wiping down the bar on the other side of him. Better or worse? She asked. He considered the question with the honesty of a man who'd spent enough time in bureaucracies to know that better and worse were relative terms. More specific, he said, which is better than what we had, which was vague enough that it could go either direction depending on who was applying it. He drank his coffee. You've been here 9 months, he said, caused no incidents, filed your paperwork, employed by a legitimate establishment. He paused, teaching 6 residents techniques that 2 of them have already used to de-escalate situations that would have otherwise required my office to get involved. Grin looked at him. I'm not saying it's solved, he said. I'm saying it's different than it was. He left his payment on the bar and left. Mara appeared from the kitchen. Did the marshal just almost compliment you? Grin considered it. He described facts that were positive, she said. It was close. Mara made the sound that wasn't quite a laugh and went back to the kitchen. The iron mug at 9 o'clock on a Thursday evening was occupied at about two-thirds capacity, which was the occupation level that produced comfortable noise without crossing into the territory that required active management. Corden was at his corner table. Two of Grin's students were at a table near the window, having a conversation that involved a significant difference of opinion about something and was being conducted without any of it becoming anyone else's problem. Mara was behind the bar with the efficient authority of someone who had turned the management of a room full of people into something close to an art form. Grin was carrying a tray back from the far end of the room when the door opened. She heard it before she turned. The sound of the door and then the alteration in the room's ambient noise that happens when something new enters and the room makes its assessment. Not the sharp drop that comes with something threatening, something smaller. The adjustment of a room, noticing something that required a second look. She turned. A young orc stood in the doorway. 19 maybe, 20 at the outside. The build of someone who'd been strong and was no longer as strong as they'd been, which was a specific kind of shape that had a specific cause. Green skin gone dull the way skin goes when the body is running on less than it needs. Armor that fit differently than it had been fitted for. A posture that was trying to be upright and was having a complicated relationship with the effort. Dust on everything. Nevada desert dust. Grin would have said so confidently. The young orc's eyes moved across the room with the careful inventory of someone trying to determine how welcome they were going to be before they committed to being somewhere. Found the bar, found Mara, who was already looking back with the assessment she applied to everything that came through her door. Found the tables, found the students who were watching with the mix of recognition and curiosity that people feel when they see something they've seen before in a context they didn't expect. Found Grin. Something in her face changed, minuscule. The adjustment of someone who has been braced for a particular outcome and has just encountered unexpected data. She walked toward this corner table because that's where Grin was moving, because that's where Corden was already sitting, because the corner table was the fixed point around which the iron mug organized its evenings. She stopped 3 feet away. Grin set the tray down. The young orc looked at them both. At the table with its 2 mugs and the plate of food that Mara had sent out without being asked. At the 2 people who occupied the space, the way people occupy a space when they've been in it long enough that it's organized itself around them. She swallowed. "Excuse me," she said. Her voice had the texture of someone who hadn't used it much recently, or had used it on the desert and found that the desert didn't answer. "I'm sorry, too." She stopped, started again. "Can I eat with you?" The room didn't change. The noise continued. The fire in the hearth kept its position on the matter. But something moved. In the corner table, in the space between 2 people who had been sitting together long enough to know each other without needing to say much about it, something passed between them. Grin looked at Corden. Corden looked at Grin. The look of 2 people sharing a recognition that doesn't need words because words would only ever be approximate anyway. Corden's expression was doing the quiet thing it did when something landed in him that mattered. Grin looked at the young orc, at the dust and the dull skin and the armor that didn't fit right anymore, at the posture that was trying, at the eyes that were waiting for the answer that would determine what the next few minutes were. "Sit down," Grin said. She pulled out the chair across from them, set it facing the fire the way she'd learned to position chairs in rooms with fires, so that the person sitting in them gets the full benefit of the heat rather than just the promise of it. The young orc sat. Mara appeared from behind the bar, already carrying a plate and a mug, already en route, already 3 steps ahead of being asked. She set them on the table with the efficiency of a woman who had seen this situation before in its first iteration 9 months ago, and had understood it then for what it was, and understood it now in its return. She didn't say anything, just went back to the bar. Grin watched the young orc look at the food on the plate, watched her jaw tighten, watched the private war between the part of her that knew how to accept something and the part of her that had been trained to not need things from other people. "Eat slow," Grin said. The young orc looked up. Your stomach's going to have opinions. Give it time to adjust. She ate slow. Grin and Corden gave her the silence she needed. The silence of the corner table, which had hosted a lot of things over 9 months and had learned the difference between the silences that wanted filling and the ones that needed to be left alone. The young orc's name was Ven. She'd been traveling for 11 days. She'd run out of water on the 9th and food on the 8th. She'd found a road and followed it west on the advice of a passing trader who'd said there was a town that didn't ask too many questions about where you came from. She'd been exiled from her clan. She said this the way people say things they've said before and can't stop saying. The way it comes out flat because you've processed it past the point where it still has the capacity to surprise you, but not past the point where it stopped being heavy. Grin didn't ask what for, didn't need to. There were, she'd come to understand, a limited number of reasons that produced this combination of dust and bearing, and the quality of someone who had made a choice they'd make again and were still in the early stages of figuring out what that meant for the rest of everything. Corden refilled his mug, asked Ven if she wanted coffee. She said yes, with the slight uncertainty of someone who wasn't sure if yes was the right answer. He flagged Mara anyway. You got somewhere to go? He asked. After tonight, Ven looked at the table. Not really. Work's available here, Grin said. If you want it, it's not complicated work. But it's real work, and it pays, and there's a room. Ven looked at her. Mara's the one who hires, Grin said. Not me. I just lift barrels and break up fights and teach people every morning how to handle themselves without making other people's problems worse. She paused. Mara will ask you 2 questions. Did you cause trouble where you came from, and can you work? Those are the only 2 questions that matter here. Ven processed this. The fire crackled. Someone at the far table laughed at some point. The iron mug continued being what it was, which was loud in the ways of places that have stopped being self-conscious about the noise they make. Grin put her hand in her pocket. Found the stone. She'd been finding it for 9 months. The familiar weight, the warmth it held from being carried, the gold veins she knew by touch as well as sight now. Her father's voice, which had grown quieter over the months. Not gone, just quieter. The way things get quiet when they've finished needing to be loud. She took it out, held it in her palm, looked at it in the firelight the way she'd looked at it in the desert and in Corden's campfire glow, and in the early morning at the Iron Gate and at every point between where she'd needed the weight of something real. Corden watched her. He knew what she was doing. She could tell from the way he was holding himself, from the quality of his attention, which was the attention of someone who is witnessing something and knows it. She set the stone on the table, looked at it for a moment, pushed it across toward Ven. The young orc looked at the stone, looked at Grin. Keep it, Grin said. When you lose your way, hold it. It'll remind you that where you came from isn't the same thing as who you are, and it'll remind you that blood doesn't wash away, even when everything else does. Ven looked at the stone for a long time. Then she picked it up, held it the way you hold something when you can feel that it's been held before by hands that meant it, turned it over, saw the gold veins, saw the faint mark on the underside, didn't ask what it meant, didn't need to yet. She put it in her pocket. Thank you, she said. Grin looked at Corden, he was looking at his mug, doing the careful looking at something else that he did when he was paying attention to something he didn't want to make a production of. She'd asked him once, a few months ago, what he'd done with the broken piece of the clan token he'd picked up outside the gate the morning Dora left. He'd pulled it out of his pocket and set it on the table between them without comment. It was still rough on the broken edge, but he'd done something to the carved face. Small, careful work, the kind that takes time and isn't done for an audience. The bloodstone mark was still there, but around it, in the available space, he'd added other marks, ones she didn't immediately recognize. She'd asked him what they were. He'd thought about it. Things that are still here, he said, after everything else. She'd looked at the token, at the broken edge and the old mark and the new ones. She hadn't asked him to explain. Some things don't need to be explained to be understood. Mara came over now, set a bottle on the table, the stronger stuff, without ceremony, without preamble, with the efficiency of a woman who has long since decided that efficiency is the appropriate response to most things worth responding to. She looked at Ven, at the young orc with the dust and the stone now in her pocket and the plate that was becoming empty. You need somewhere to sleep tonight? Mara asked. Yes, Ven said. Please. Room's 20 cents a week. Meals are covered while you're working. Work starts when I say and ends when I say, and the rule in my place is you don't cause problems I have to solve. She looked at Ven steadily. Can you do that? Yes, Ven said. Mara nodded once, pointed at the door behind the bar. Room's at the end of the hall. Second door, keys in the lock. Come find me in the morning. Then she went back to the bar, back to the business of running a place that had become, over 9 months, something it hadn't been designed to be. More complicated, more full of people who were figuring out what they were after the thing they'd been before stopped being available. Also, somehow, more itself. Grin looked around the iron mug. At the corner table that had become a fixed point in the way that fixed points form when the people decide, without planning it, to keep returning to the same place. At the students from the morning session who were still here, having their disagreement that had become a conversation, that had become something that would probably still be talked about next week. At Mara behind the bar, moving with the authority of someone who has made peace with the fact that this is her place and these are her people, and the definition of both has got more complicated over time, and she's decided that's fine. At Corden, who was looking at the room with the quiet attention of a man who had arrived somewhere he hadn't planned to arrive and had decided that the arriving was the right thing after all. You ever think about what you lost? She asked him. He considered it honestly. Used to, he said. First couple years. And now? He picked up his mug. Now I mostly think about what I'm looking at, he said. She looked at what she was looking at a young orc eating a real meal at the corner table of a place that hadn't looked too closely at the questions that would have kept her out. At a town that was imperfect in all the ways that places are imperfect when they're real rather than imagined. At the iron gates that kept standing, whether anyone thought they would or not. At the ordinary fact of being somewhere, of having arrived, after everything. Mara set glasses on the table, poured without asking. You two are idiots, she said, fondly. The specific fond of a woman who has decided that a thing is hers, even though she never planned for it to be. We know, Grin said. My idiots, Mara said, already walking away, already telling someone at the far table to settle down before she settled them. Grin raised her glass. Corden raised his. Ven, uncertain but willing, raised hers. The world outside the iron mug continued. The trade routes carried their commerce. Iron Gate held its position at the intersection of three roads that had given up trying to be separate and had become something functional instead. The desert did its desert thing, patient and enormous and indifferent in the way of things that have been there longer than anything else and will be there long after. Inside, the fire kept burning, and in her pocket, a young orc's hand found a stone that had been carried a long way through hard country by someone who'd been given nothing, once, except a fire to sit near and one word that was only a single syllable long, sit. The word that costs nothing and means everything when it's the one you needed and the one you thought you wouldn't get. Outside, the Nevada night was cold and clear and absolutely full of stars going wherever stars go in their hurry. Inside, there was room for one more. There always had been.